The sound came first, a single metallic clang, the squat rack at Station 4 swaying slightly as the barbell settled into its cradle. The fluorescent lights of the Naval Station Coronado Fitness Center buzzed overhead, casting everything in that flat, institutional white that makes 4 in the morning look exactly like 4 in the afternoon. Most of the gym was still dark. The cardio machines sat idle. The free weight area at the far end held only one person. Petty Officer Second Class Ivory had arrived at 0527, the way she always did, quietly, without announcement, her name stenciled on the door log in the same plain block letters as everyone else. HM2 Ivory, Medical. No unit patch on her training shorts. No motivational phrase on her shirt. Just a faded gray tee, Navy-issue sweats, and a pair of worn lifting shoes that had clearly logged more hours than anyone in this building would guess by looking at her. She was not a large woman. That was the first thing people noticed. The absence of the bulk that this gym rewarded, the lean economy of someone built for endurance rather than display. Her hair was pulled back without ceremony, a single band doing quiet, functional work. She chalked her hands from a beat-up block in her bag, rubbed them together with the methodical patience of someone completing a checklist, and stepped under the bar. No music, no preset ritual, no mirror checking. She just lifted. Hazel Torres had been on the early shift rotation for 3 weeks running and had seen Ivory here before, always this hour, always alone, always in the back corner of the rack section, like she was trying to take up as little collective space as possible. Hazel was wiping down the treadmill belts at the far end of the room, half paying attention, when the main door opened, and the world inside that gym changed the way weather changes, not gradually, but all at once. 4 men. SEAL Team 6 patch on the lead man's sleeve, visible even from across the room in that half-lit quiet. They moved through the door the way people move when they've never once had to wonder whether a space belonged to them. Broad, certain, loud in their silence, if that makes any sense. The way that a group of people who have never been asked to make themselves smaller simply don't. The one in front, Petty Officer First Class Brick Calloway, was built the way recruiting posters dream about. 6'2", shoulders that seemed to require a conscious decision to fit through a standard door frame. A jaw that looked like it had been cast rather than grown. He had the kind of physical confidence that some men wear like a coat, and others are simply born in. And Calloway had clearly never spent a moment of his life outside of it. He scanned the gym the way people scan rooms they already own, cataloging exits, equipment, and inconveniences. And his eyes landed on Station 4, on the woman using it. He stopped, not out of courtesy, out of calculation. Behind him, Flynn Garrett, shorter, blonde-haired, with a grin that never quite disconnected from his face, gave Calloway a look, and then glanced over at Ivory with something that wasn't quite a smirk, but was the thing that comes right before one. Ethan Morse, moving alongside him, pushed his training glasses up and said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. Levi Donnell brought up the rear, dropping his bag by the door. Calloway crossed the floor in 8 strides. He didn't ask. He simply placed both hands on the barbell at Station 4, the one Ivory had been using, and tapped it twice, like a man signaling a cab. Yo! His voice was level, easy, the tone of someone who expects to be understood. We're doing team sets here, you mind? Ivory looked up from where she'd been adjusting the plate she'd just removed. The look she gave him was unreadable, not hostile, not frightened, not particularly anything. She held it for 1 second, then 2, and then she began methodically stacking the plates she'd been using beside the rack, the way someone completes a task rather than surrenders it. Calloway watched this and nodded, turning away before she was even finished. Good, he said to no one in particular, which managed to be more dismissive than if he'd said it directly to her face. Flynn Garrett moved to claim the pull-up bar station beside the squat rack, and as Ivory gathered her chalk block and moved to put distance between herself and all 4 of them, her sleeve rode up past her elbow. The tattoo caught the gym light. It was a bird, an eagle or a hawk, rendered in clean black lines, wings spread in the particular way that suggests movement frozen at its most powerful moment. Beneath the wingspan, lines ran in what most people would read as abstract ornamentation, fine geometric hatching that looked like a topographic sketch. the kind of detail work that takes hours in a chair. At the very lower right edge, nearly hidden in the negative space of the design, a small cluster of text sat so discreet it might have been a signature. Flynn saw it. His grin clicked up one notch. Parlor girl knows when to step aside. He said it loud enough to travel, not shouted, but projected with the ease of someone who spent time speaking over wind and rotors. Where'd you get that? Spring break? Ivory did not turn around. She walked to the pull-up bar at the adjacent station, chalked her hands again, and jumped to the bar with a motion so smooth it was almost architectural. Two hands closing on the metal at shoulder width, body going still, not even a swing in her legs. A dead hang, just holding. Hazel Torres had stopped wiping the treadmill. She was watching now, the cloth still in her hand, turned toward the rack section with the careful attention of someone who has noticed something she can't yet name. Then Calloway moved toward Ivory again. He didn't need to. There were 4 other pull-up bars in the gym, but he walked to the bar directly beside hers, gripped it, and hung there a moment, looking over at her the way one might look at a car parked in a spot they'd wanted. "It's not a tattoo parlor," he said, his voice dropping to something more private, more pointed. The words were slow and spaced, each one landing with deliberate weight. "That ink belongs on a wall, not when someone's standing in your way." He paused. "Not a parlor, sweet." Ivory released the bar, dusted her hands against each other, left, then right, then fingers spread and held firm, before closing again with a sequence that meant nothing to anyone watching, except Hazel Torres, who had once served alongside a combat escort and knew exactly what to do with gesture after a thin moment. Without a word, Ivory moved to the far corner of the gym, the section nobody used, where the lighting was weakest and the equipment coldest, and resumed her workout. Elijah Pratt, 53 years old and 2 decades removed from active service with the 82nd Airborne, had been filming slow, controlled downloads from the corners of 0-5. He'd watched the whole thing from a little pair of reading glasses he wore, for no reason anyone had ever been able to explain, since his vision tested fine. He set his barbell down, stood up, and looked at Ivan's back as she sat in the other space. Then he looked at Calloway's back, then back up. He didn't speak. He sat down on the bench beside his bar and picked up his water bottle and did not say a single word, which was itself a kind of declaration. From near the door, Caleb Marsh, 19 years old, 8 weeks into his first assignment, still wearing the slightly stunned expression of a man who recently discovered that the Navy was not British, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He'd come in for a morning run, and had instead found something he didn't have a category for. Beside him, Amber Newell leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching Calloway's feet with the particular stillness of a woman who has learned in silence is not anything, she might say. Carter Webb, NC. O on Jim Doe, stationed in the glass office at the front, watched the entire exchange from behind his desk without standing up. He scratched something in his logbook, turned a page. If you've ever been underestimated, passed over, talked down to, dismissed before you ever had a chance to speak, this story is for you. Ivory's story is just getting started, and trust me, what's coming will leave you speechless. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single second. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to prove yourself to someone who already made up their mind about you? Let's hear it. Flynn Garrett, not yet satisfied, strolled toward the corner where Ivory had settled. He was carrying a pair of dumbbells he didn't need. They were props, really, a pretext for proximity. He set them on the rack beside her, looked at the weight she was using, and gave a slow exhale that managed to express, without a single syllable, exactly what he thought of it. 20 kilos, he said, reading the plate like it was a menu item that had disappointed him. Respect. The pause before respect took the word apart entirely. Ivory did not look at it. She was seated on the bench, back straight, preparing for the next set, the focus somewhere interior and unreachable. Flynn picked up her dumbbell and moved it further than ever. In its place, he set one weighing 40 kilos, almost exactly double, and stepped back with the air of someone who had just done a thing. "Here," he said, "use something real." 3 seconds of silence. Ivory looked at the 40-kilo dumbbell, not with a lump, not with the stiffening that comes from a challenge accepted under social pressure. She looked at it the way a tradesperson looks at a tool that's been sat down, positioned herself, and performed 6 clean repetitions. No backlash, no compensation, no rules. Levi Donnell, who had been setting up his own station nearby, his hand was on the board of the and its sleeve suspended as he watched Ivory complete the 6th round and set the weight back out soon. He didn't say much. He didn't know. But when he turned back to his own bar, the corner of his expression had shifted to some small but visible degree, as if a simple equation had suddenly produced a man that hadn't expected. Calloway noticed Levi's reaction and overrode it. People override things that challenge comfortable assumptions. He crossed to the gym's floor NCO station and beckoned Carter Webb in his glass box. "Senior Chief Tills," Webb said, holding up one finger, meaning wait, the place to call first. Raymond Tills arrived 3 minutes later, silver-haired, deliberate in his movements, carrying the compressed authority of someone who had spent 31 years making decisions. He crossed the gym floor, looked at the back corner, and then looked at the rack section where Calloway's team was sitting. A brief special calculus. HM2, he addressed Ivory without coming close to her. "This section's been blocked for team training." Ivory set down the weight she'd been holding. She looked at Tills with the same level expression she'd given Calloway, unhurried, undramatic, clear as still water. "The reservation board shows open access until 0700, Senior Chief." Tills turned to look at the board. It was, in fact, unmarked for this section. He looked back at Ivory. The pause that followed was almost philosophical, the pause of a man deciding which kind of problem this was. "Move anyway," he said. It was the kind of sentence that would have, in most people, cracked something open. An injustice stated plainly, requiring submission. The room felt it. Hazel Torres felt it. Amber Novak, from the doorway, pressed her lips together and looked at the floor. And then from the main entrance, the door that had been closed since Calloway's team arrived, came the sound of a keycard reader clicking and the slow, measured sound of someone entering who did not announce themselves. Commander Jasper Holt was 44 years old and walked as though every step was a considered choice. SEAL Team 3, Commanding Officer. The kind of man whose presence doesn't fill a room so much as reorganize it. The way a gyroscope makes everything around it suddenly aware of true north. Beside him, Petty Officer First Class Otis Crane carried a tablet under one arm and matched his commander's pace without trying to. Holt stopped 2 steps inside the door. His eyes moved across the gym with the practiced economy of a man trained to read environments in fractions of a second. Threat assessment, force distribution, structural features. And then they stopped. They stopped on the far corner, on the woman standing there in a gray tee, holding her ground in the section with the worst lighting in the building, a senior chief's directive still hanging in the air around her. More specifically, they stopped on her arm. Otis Crane said something quietly beside him. Holt did not move, did not respond. His eyes did not move from the tattoo. "Not yet," Holt said, so quietly it barely cleared his own lips. Calloway, who had seen Holt enter, snapped his posture into something more presentable. "Morning, Commander," he offered, with the particular brightness of someone recalibrating mid-play. Holt's eyes finally moved, not to Calloway, but to Tills, a fractional look, the kind that carries a full sentence in a single glance. Tills received it and understood nothing from it, which itself told him something. The commander moved to the free weights section and began his own warm-up. Otis Crane found a bench nearby and opened his tablet with the studied casualness of a man whose job includes witnessing things without appearing to witness them. Caleb Marsh, near the door, took his phone from his pocket. Amber Novak put a hand on his arm. "Not yet," she said. It was remarkable, though no one noticed it in the moment, that she had used the exact same 2 words Holt had. Ivory moved to the pull-up bar in the back corner. Not the same bar she'd been at earlier. That one was in Calloway's territory now, but the older bar near the water fountain, chrome worn to a dull silver in the places where chalk and time had done their work. She jumped to it with the same unhurried efficiency as before, both hands closed on the bar. She went still. Flynn Garrett set down his cable machine and walked over. He was holding a stopwatch in one hand, because Flynn Garrett was the kind of person who needed a stopwatch to perform magnanimity. "Tell you what," he said, loud enough to carry to the middle of the room. He looked at Ivory hanging from the bar and then back at Calloway, who had stopped what he was doing and was watching. "You want to prove you belong here? 5 minutes on that bar. You make it," he shrugged, generous. "You keep whatever station you want." The gym went the specific kind of quiet that forms around a line being crossed. Ivory didn't answer. She looked at the bar above her hands, then at Flynn, then at the bar again. 5 minutes, she said. She had said 4 words in the last 30 minutes. These were numbers 3 and 4. The stopwatch started. 1 minute passed. Calloway folded his arms and watched with the confidence of someone who has seen this before. A point being made, already written in his favor, already concluded. Flynn smiled at his stopwatch. Ethan Morse leaned against the wall and said nothing, but his eyes, behind their lenses, had taken on the focused quality of a man doing math. 2 minutes. Ivory's grip hadn't shifted. Her breathing was audible now. Not labored, but rhythmic. 4 counts in. A pause. 4 counts out. A pattern Elijah Pratt recognized from the corner of the room where he had stopped pretending to stretch and was simply watching. His jaw moved slightly. He'd heard that breathing pattern in another context, another decade, another theater. It was the rhythm they taught in certain advanced courses. Not CrossFit prep, not general athletics. Tactical breathing. The kind used to keep a heart rate stable under specific extreme operational conditions. Elijah set down his water bottle with great deliberateness. 3 minutes. Flynn's smile was less comfortable than it had been at the start. Levi Donnell had stopped all pretense of training and was standing in the middle of the floor with a towel over his shoulder, watching. Then Ethan Morse stepped closer, not toward Ivory, but toward Levi. He leaned in. "Look at her thumbs," he said quietly. Levi looked. Ivory's thumb position on the bar was not the standard overhand grip. The thumb did not wrap around. Instead, it pressed against the side of the index finger in a hook grip, the configuration used by people who need to maintain hold under load while moving vertically, usually along ropes, usually with weight attached, usually in environments where letting go is not a theoretical consideration. "That's a combat grip," Ethan said. Levi said nothing. But the part of his expression that had shifted earlier shifted further. 4 minutes. Carter Webb had come out of his glass office and was standing at the edge of the room. Nobody had asked him to. He was just there, like a man who has walked toward a window because something outside has changed. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Raymond Tills, who had delivered a direct order to move and watched it go unexecuted and had said nothing since, stood near the far wall with his arms folded and his eyes fixed on the woman at the bar with an expression that no longer contained the certainty it had held 20 minutes ago. 5 minutes. Flynn's stopwatch beeped. Ivory did not come down. Flynn looked at the stopwatch, then at Ivory. "Okay," he said. "You made it." She stayed on the bar, 5 minutes and 30 seconds. 6 minutes. Elijah Pratt had picked up his phone and was looking at it with the focused attention of a man who had just thought of something important. 6 minutes and 30 seconds. 8 minutes, Caleb Marsh said from the doorway. So quietly, it might have been to himself. He'd been counting on his phone. "The base record is 7:40. Amber Novak looked at him. "Was," she said. 7 minutes and 41 seconds. A number that had been written in the gym records for 3 years, belonging to a Fleet Marine Force recon operator who had trained here for 2 weeks and left an impression in the logbook that had stayed as a kind of landmark. 7 minutes and 42 seconds. 7 minutes and 50. 8 minutes flat. Ivory dropped from the bar. Her landing was soft, knees slightly bent, weight absorbed through the balls of her feet, a landing that minimized noise, minimized impact, the landing of someone accustomed to arriving in places without announcing themselves. She stood upright, took a normal breath, and then extended her fingers one by one in sequence. Index, middle, ring, pinky, left hand, then right. A recovery routine. Specific, automatic. The kind built into muscle memory through repetition in environments where the fingers need to work immediately after the hang. Senior Chief Tills stared at her hands. Commander Holt, 15 feet away, had stopped his warm-up entirely. Flynn Garrett had turned off his stopwatch and was holding it loosely, looking at it as though it had given him information he wasn't sure what to do with. Ethan Morse pushed his glasses up, looked at Ivory's hands, looked at the bar. "CrossFit athlete," he said. He looked at Flynn. "She's a CrossFit athlete, one of those YouTube competitors." He said it with the particular energy of a man reaching for a life raft. Flynn latched onto it immediately. Carter Webb, from his position near the wall, audibly exhaled and nodded. The room accepted this explanation the way a room full of people accepts any explanation that resolves a discomfort, quickly and without examination. Elijah Pratt did not nod. He looked at the bar, looked at Ivory's hands, still completing their methodical finger-by-finger extension, looked at the old chalk marks on the bar, and he stood up from his bench, walked across the room, and placed himself 3 feet from Ivory, facing her. He was quiet for a moment. Then, 82nd Airborne, he said, 98 to 2006. He waited. He was not asking a question. He was offering a coordinate, the way old soldiers sometimes do, laying a flag in the ground, waiting to see if someone else will recognize the territory. Ivory looked at him. Her face was the same open, unreadable surface it had been all morning. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then Elijah said, "You don't have to say anything." He walked back to his bench and resumed his workout with the composure of a man who has delivered a message and is prepared for any outcome, including silence. Hazel Torres watched him sit down. Then she watched Ivory, who had turned toward the water fountain, whose sleeve had ridden up slightly again, whose tattoo was briefly visible in the better light near the fountain. The eagle's wings, the fine hatching underneath, and at the bottom right corner, a cluster of markings too small to read from across the room. Hazel was a corpsman. She'd completed her trauma rotation at Balboa. She knew the topography of military ink, the flash of the 75th Ranger Regiment, the trident, the scroll. She didn't know what this was, but she knew what it wasn't. It wasn't spring break. It wasn't a parlor. Otis Crane, on his bench across the room, had his tablet open and was typing something with the focused efficiency of a man running a query. He looked at the screen. He looked at Holt's back. He looked at the screen again. His jaw tightened by 1 visible degree. Brick Calloway had been watching all of this without the certainty he'd walked in with. The morning had not unfolded the way mornings in this gym unfolded. The woman in the back corner had not behaved according to any of the established scripts. She had not argued. She had not cried. She had not produced gratitude or anger or embarrassment in any of the forms those responses usually took. She had simply continued existing in the space, quietly, completely, like something that had been there before the gym was built and would remain after it was gone. This bothered Calloway in ways he would not, at that moment, have been able to articulate. He decided to resolve it the way he resolved things, directly. He crossed to the water fountain area, arriving just as Ivory straightened from her drink. He planted himself in her path, not aggressively, just presently, the way a door is present. "I don't know what game you're playing," he said. His voice was low now. "Not for the room, for her. But this is my gym, my people. You've been here since before 0530, pulling every stunt in the book." He paused. "Who are you, really?" Ivory looked up at him. The look was level, not defiant, not afraid, simply direct, the way a horizon is direct. "It doesn't argue with you. It's simply where it is." She held the look for 3 seconds. Then she stepped around him and walked back toward the far corner. Calloway turned to watch her go. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. Flynn Garrett, who had witnessed it from 20 feet away, looked at the floor. Even he didn't have a line for this one. "You felt it too, didn't you? That moment where something doesn't add up, where the person they dismissed starts looking less like a victim and more like something else entirely. We're at the halfway point. And I promise you, what Ivory is hiding is bigger than anything Brick imagined. Subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today." Ethan Morse had been thinking for several minutes. He was a weapons systems specialist, EOD qualified, additional training in advanced ordnance, the kind of technical background that made him, in Calloway's team, the person who was called upon when something needed to be precisely understood. He had a habit of testing things the way engineers test things, by applying load and observing behavior. He walked toward the corner where Ivory was resting between sets. "Harmless question," he said, which was the kind of opening that announces precisely the opposite. He settled on the bench beside hers, uninvited, projecting conversational ease. "You work medical, yeah? Combat Lifesaver certified?" Ivory looked at him. "Yes." "Right, so what's the recommended grip width for Jumar ascent in a vertical cave extraction?" The question landed in the space between them, and for a half-second nothing moved. It was an extraordinarily specific question. Jumar mechanical ascenders were pieces of technical rope equipment used in caving, in technical search and rescue, and in a small number of classified military contexts involving vertical or semi-vertical insertion and extraction in confined terrain. The specifications Ethan had asked about were not in any field medical manual. They were not covered in combat lifesaver training, advanced trauma life support, or any corpsman curriculum that Ethan knew of. He'd asked it as a test, a box that should have produced a blank look, a shrug, and I don't know what that is. Ivory opened her mouth and answered, shoulder width plus 4 centimeters, offset for angle when pitch exceeds 60 degrees, adjusted for ascender model and operator weight. She cited a number, precise, technical, correct, and then stopped. A beat of silence. She looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at her. He did not move, did not speak. Behind his lenses, his eyes had taken on the flat, processing quality of a computer working through a calculation it did not expect. Ivory had just recited a specification from a course that had, as far as Ethan knew, a total enrollment somewhere in the double digits, nationally, annually, in any given year. A course that was not civilian, not publicly listed, a course he knew about only because a warrant officer in his chain of command had attended it in 2011 and had mentioned it once, obliquely, in a context that did not invite follow-up questions. Jamara sent specs to that precision did not live in the head of a corpsman who filed medical records and worked base clinic rotations. Ethan turned to Levi. His voice was barely a breath. Jumar specs aren't in any medical training curriculum. Levi said, I know. They both looked at Ivory, who had picked up her water bottle and was looking at neither of them, her jaw set in the particular way of someone who has just said more than they intended, and knows it, and has decided that the correct response is stillness. Carter Webb had returned to his office. He reached up and toggled the breaker that controlled the lighting in the far corner. The back section, the section with the old equipment, the section where Ivory was sitting, the lights went out. Ivory sat in the dim residual light from the main floor and did not move. She was perfectly visible from the main area. The darkness was theatrical, not practical, and she simply resumed her breathing and placed her hands on her knees and waited with the patience of someone who has spent time in places where the light was considerably less. Floyd Kessler, master at arms, who had come in for his own shift prep and had been standing near the secondary entrance for approximately 4 minutes, took a step toward Carter Webb's office. Carter saw him coming and turned the lights back on. Senior Chief Tills, who had been on his phone in the far corner for the last 90 seconds, ended his call. He looked across the gym at Ivory, then at Holt, then at Ivory again. He walked to Carter Webb's position and said something in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. Carter Webb put both hands flat on his desk and looked at the surface of it. While this was happening, Hazel Torres had crossed the room. She came to stand near Ivory's bench, not at it, but near it, close enough to be visible, far enough to not be presumptuous. She spoke quietly. I know what you're doing, she said. And then, at Ivory's glance, I don't mean like that. I just mean I see it. You're not going to give them what they want. She paused. You're doing the right thing. Ivory looked at her for a moment, something fractionally adjusted in her expression. Not warmth, exactly, but recognition. The acknowledgement of someone who has been seen by a person worth being seen by. Then Ivory looked past Hazel at the opposite side of the gym, at Otis Crane, who had stopped typing and was looking at his tablet with the stillness of a man who has found something he did not expect to find. Crane's eyes moved to Commander Holt's back. He stood, crossed to Holt, and held the tablet screen in front of him at a low angle, turned so only the two of them could see. Holt looked at the screen. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, he was looking at Ivory. Brick Calloway, who had been watching Holt's body language with the instinct of someone accustomed to reading commanding officers at a distance, saw the change. He couldn't name it, but he could see it. The almost imperceptible shift in his skin, the quality of attention in his face, the fact that Crane had closed his tablet and stepped back and was now watching Ivory, something that moved at this distance with caution. Calloway did not refuse a good. They made him look himself. He walked across the gym floor, at the middle of the space deliberately, giving himself the whole room's audience, and stopped in front of Ivory's bench. This time his voice did not modulate like said. This time, I don't know what game you're on, he said. I'm going to be straight. He glanced at the hilt of the conversation, at Tills, at Cody, at the room of people watching. Release her arm, Calloway! The woman did not quite stop. Changing, Calloway's hand froze in the air 2 inches from the inside of Ivory's forearm. He turned slowly and looked at his commanding officer. Holt's face was entirely neutral, not angry, not alarmed, simply certain, the way a compass needle is certain. Sir, release her arm. Calloway lowered his hand. Commander Holt crossed the floor. His footsteps made no particular sound. He stopped in front of Calloway, looked at him, and then passed him by. HM2, he said. His voice was different, not soft or exact, but differently calibrated, the way a man speaks when he is addressing something specific, not something general. This has gone far. Ivory met his eyes. Agreed, sir, she said. And that was when Brick Calloway made the decision that it would not go back. He had been measured this morning and found himself at every turn short of measuring. The CrossFit explanation hadn't held. The Jumar question had opened a door he still couldn't see behind. His commanding officer was standing between him and a corpsman who had not once raised her voice or her hands. And there was something in all of this, in the whole 30-minute accumulation of it, that felt, to a man who lived inside certainty, like standing on a floor that had started asking questions. He couldn't have it. Commander, his voice was loud enough. With respect, she's been blocking team equipment since 0527. She won't answer a direct question. She won't... Calloway. Holt did not raise his voice. He did not need to. There was in his tone what there is in the sound of a door locking. Final, physical, complete. I am speaking. Calloway stopped. Holt looked at Ivory for a long moment. Then, in a motion that had no drama in it, no theater, no announcement, because the people who have earned things never need to announce them, he reached out toward her, not to grab her, to lean. He leaned slightly forward and looked at the lower right corner of the tattoo, at the cluster of markings Hazel Torres had not removed. A serial designation in 2 parts, a letter number sequence, and beneath it, a unit identifier. 4 characters total, plus a slash, plus an abbreviation. PH-7/AFSOC. The color didn't ring from Jasper Holt's face. Men trained the way he was trained and looked familiar. But something behind his eyes was very still. The specific stillness of a man confronted by something in the last summer classified breaking point in 2008 in a document that had been collected and shredded for 30 years old, and that he thought in the years since he would never see. He straightened. He looked at her. She was watching, not to see if he recognized her. She already knew whether he would or not. She was watching to see what he would do. You weren't supposed to be here this morning, she said. 3 seconds passed in the gym with 3 hours. Neither of them Holt sat quiet. 6 years ago. And the woman did not understand this exchange. But the woman felt it. The way you feel that every pressure changed before anyone else without knowing yet what the weather was. Caleb Marsh had spoken. Amber Novak did not stop at this time. Hazel Torres pressed one hand. Elijah Pratt stood up from his bench with her. The automatic posture adjustment of a man returning to play fast. The body remembering the mind as it prior to. Britt Calloway looked at the tattoo. Something fundamental was shifting, and you could feel it the way you feel an aircraft entering turbulence. Not realizing the chest, below all reasoning. Commander, he said, and his voice had changed. The certainty was still there, but now it was a question wearing a certainty's clothing. Who is she? Jasper Holt did not answer him. He was looking at Ivory, and Otis Crane, tablet in hand, was walking quietly to stand at his commander's left shoulder. And Raymond Tills had stopped moving entirely, and somewhere in the building the HVAC system clicked over, and the ventilation shifted, and the gym went, just for a moment, just for the space between one breath and the next. Very, very quiet. What no one in that room knew yet, what Brick Calloway had no framework to understand, what Flynn Garrett's stopwatch had not been built to measure, was that the woman they had spent the last 30 minutes dismissing had once stood in a narrow valley outside Kandahar province and made a decision in the dark that brought 14 operators home from a mission that no longer existed in any record anywhere. And the man now standing beside her was the person who had signed the orders that sent them there. In 20 minutes, that would change everything. In the next 20 minutes, Ivory would not have a choice about what they learned. Brick Calloway had asked his question and the gym had not answered it. That silence had a texture to it, not the silence of an empty room, but the silence of a room full of people who have simultaneously reached the edge of what they understand and stopped all at once, like a crowd arriving at a cliff. Calloway stood in the middle of it, waiting for Jasper Holt to speak, and Holt was still looking at Ivory, and Ivory was looking at neither of them, but at some middle distance only she could see. Otis Crane stood at Holt's shoulder with the tablet face down against his thigh, and his eyes doing the work that his face refused to, moving from Ivory to the door to the exit routes and back again, the involuntary security sweep of a man whose training runs deeper than his composure. "Commander," Calloway tried again, "I'm asking you directly." Holt turned his head. He looked at Calloway for a measured moment, the look of a man deciding not what to say, but how much of it, in what order, and to what end. Then he looked at the room, at Tills standing near the wall with his arms no longer folded, at Hazel Torres still near the water fountain, one hand at her side, at Elijah Pratt who had risen without deciding to, and was standing in parade rest the way a body remembers things the mind has not yet acknowledged. "Not here," Holt said. He said it to no one specific, and everyone at once. Calloway's jaw tightened. "Sir, I said not here, petty officer." And this time the words had an edge that had not been present before. Not loud, but structural. The kind of boundary that is architectural rather than emotional. A wall, not a request. Calloway stopped. The gym held its collective breath in the particular way that groups of people hold breath. Not all at once, but through the gradual cessation of small movements, the setting down of equipment, the turning of faces, until the room had oriented itself entirely around the axis of what was happening in the center of it. Brick Calloway had been a petty officer first class for 4 years. He had 17 combat deployments across 3 theaters. He had operated in environments where the cost of misreading a situation was measured in lives. He understood in this moment that he had misread something significant. He simply could not yet see what. And the inability to see it made him do the thing that men like him sometimes do when they cannot see a threat. He named one louder. "With respect, Commander!" His voice was back to carrying now. Deliberate broadcast range. "She's been in this gym for over 30 minutes, and in that time she's refused to clear team space, answered questions she has no business knowing the answer to. And now she's got you standing here like Calloway." The name landed like a door closing, but Calloway wasn't finished. "I have a right to know who I'm sharing a secured base facility with." He turned to Ivory, directly. No mediation. "So I'm asking you, one more time, who are you?" He reached for her arm, not grasping, reaching. A motion with the intention of moving the sleeve, of revealing the tattoo fully, of making the question physical and therefore unanswerable by silence. His fingers closed on the fabric of her sleeve. What happened next was very small and very complete. Ivory's left hand moved, not fast, not dramatically, but with the economy of a motion that has been practiced so many thousands of times that speed is no longer its primary feature. Her fingers found the space between his thumb and index finger, the soft tissue of the webbing, and applied pressure at an angle. It was not a strike. It was a lock, a wrist control technique that redirected force through joint geometry rather than opposing strength. Calloway's arm went from reaching to stationary in the same moment, with no violence in between. He could not move forward. He could feel the restraint, not pain, but the precise architectural sensation of a joint held at its mechanical limit by someone who understood exactly where that limit was. He could not move forward. He tried once to recover the motion. Ivory's grip did not change. She was looking at him, not up at him, though he was significantly taller, but at him levelly, the same way she had looked at everything this morning, clearly, completely, without distance. 3 seconds. Then he pulled back hard, a reaction move, frustration overriding technique, and the sudden backward force did what the forward force hadn't. It caught the shoulder seam of Ivory's sleeve at exactly the angle where the fabric was thinnest, and the shirt tore, not dramatically, not in the way shirts tear in movies, with a full ripping sound and a theatrical moment of exposure. It was a clean split along the seam, 6 inches of fabric parting at the shoulder where the cotton had worn thinnest from repeated washes, and it happened in the time it takes to blink. One motion, one sound, small and definite, and the tattoo was fully visible. All of it now in the direct overhead light of the main gym floor. Not the dimmer back corner where it had been glimpsed and half seen all morning, but here, in the center of the room, under fluorescence that left nothing ambiguous. The eagle, hawk, it was clearly a hawk, a peregrine by the wing configuration, the fastest bird in the world, rendered in black ink with a precision that spoke of someone who had chosen every line deliberately, spread across the inside of her forearm from the wrist to the crook of the elbow. The hatching beneath the wings resolved, in full light, into what it actually was, a topographic representation of a specific terrain profile, rendered in the abstract style of someone who needed it to be beautiful enough to explain to anyone who asked and accurate enough to be read by the one person in the world who would know what they were looking at. And at the lower right, in the space below the bird's right wingtip, in characters so small they required proximity to read, PH-7/AFSOC. 3 seconds of silence. They were not quiet in the ordinary way that gyms go quiet. This was the silence that forms in the space between what people thought was true and what they are being asked to understand is true, a gap that is sometimes 2 inches wide and sometimes a canyon. And in this case, it was a canyon, and everyone in the room was standing at its edge simultaneously. Hazel Torres's hands came up to cover her mouth. It was not a theatrical gesture. It was the involuntary response of a woman whose mind had just connected a series of data points: the breathing rhythm, the grip, the Jumar specs, the scar on the shoulder, and now this, into a shape she could see clearly and was not prepared for. Elijah Pratt did not cover his mouth. He stood in parade rest, and his eyes were open, and he was very still. And the stillness was its own kind of testimony. Levi Donald took a step backward, then caught himself, stood where he was. Flynn Garrett had gone the specific color that people go when the comfortable narrative they've been operating inside of has collapsed. Not red, not pale, but the in-between color of a face whose blood is doing something undirected. Ethan Morse sat down on the nearest bench. He sat down the way people sit when their legs have made a decision without consulting the rest of them. Carter Webb's office door, which had been half open, did not open further, did not close. It stayed exactly where it was, which was somehow the most accurate description of Carter Webb's situation in that moment. Caleb Marsh, 19 years old, had stopped recording. He hadn't made a conscious decision to stop. His thumb had simply released the button. The way you release something when you understand suddenly that you are witnessing something that does not belong to you in the way recordings belong to people. Amber Novak looked at the floor. Her jaw was set. She was breathing very carefully. And then Jasper Holt raised his right hand. He brought it to his right temple, crisp, precise, the exact 45-degree angle that the Navy Physical Training Manual specifies, elbow at shoulder height, fingers together and flat, the geometry of 30 years of practice ceremony enacted without any ceremony at all, simply done, the way you do the thing that is correct when the moment calls for it. A full military salute, directed at Ivory. The gym went from silence into a deeper silence that had a different quality. The silence of an audience watching something that was not intended to be watched. Otis Crane looked at his commander's salute, then at Ivory. Then he raised his own hand, one beat behind Holt. Clean, correct. Raymond Tills looked at both of them, his arms unfolded, his posture changed, spine extending, shoulders back, the body enacting what the mind had not quite finished deciding, and his right hand moved to his temple. Elijah Pratt's right hand came up from parade rest with the automatic precision of a motion that requires no thought at all, because some gestures are carved into a person too deeply to need conscious instruction. The four of them, a commander, his aide, a senior chief with 3 decades of service, and an old paratrooper in civilian workout clothes, held their salutes in the fluorescent light of a base gym at 0614 in the morning. And the room held them. Calloway stood in the center of it. He had let go of Ivory's arm. He could not have said when. His hands were at his sides, and he was looking at the tattoo, and at Holt's salute, and at the line of people coming to attention around him. And his face was doing the work that faces do when the ground has shifted beneath them, cycling through responses too fast to settle on any one of them, landing nowhere, staying nowhere, moving. Amber Novak looked up from the floor, her arms uncrossed. Caleb Marsh did not put his phone back in his pocket. He just held it loosely, hanging at his side, his other hand pressed flat against his leg. Floyd Kessler, the master-at-arms, had come 4 steps forward from his position near the secondary entrance and was standing now in the middle of the room between Calloway and the door, not blocking, not advancing, just present, the way certain people make themselves present when something important is happening. Ivory stood at the center of all of it. She had not moved since her sleeve tore. She was looking at Jasper Holt, not with surprise because she had known the moment she saw him in the doorway that this was possible, that the morning might arrive here whether she chose it or not. She had tried to keep it from arriving. She had moved to corners. She had given nothing. She had answered nothing. And still, here it was. She held the salute for 2 seconds, 3, watching Holt's face, and then she brought her own right hand up. The motion was exact, no hesitation, no performance, no reluctance, just the geometry of a thing done correctly, returned in kind. The room breathed. "You weren't supposed to be here this morning, Commander," she said. Her voice was what it had been all morning, measured, quiet, without apology or theater. "Neither were you," Holt said. He lowered his salute. 6 years ago. And yet. Tills lowered his hand. Crane lowered his. Elijah Pratt lowered his and looked at his palm for a moment, then closed his fingers. Calloway's mouth was open. He closed it. Holt turned to face him. Not the Holt who had crossed the gym floor 15 minutes ago in the role of observing officer. This was a different configuration of the same man, something more load-bearing, more direct. "Petty Officer Calloway," he said, "the woman you have spent this morning harassing is the reason 14 operators from Task Force Kilo came home from Kandahar Province in August of 2009. He paused. No drama, just the space needed for scale. "You want to know who she is? She's the reason you have teammates." Calloway stood with that for a moment. The word teammates was specific, chosen, not incidental, and it landed in the particular way that relevant truths land on people who have organized their lives around the thing being named. "Kandahar," he said. The word came out quieter than anything else he had said this morning. Holt did not elaborate. "She's also the reason this conversation is the last one like this one that takes place in this command. I'll be speaking with Captain Reyes before 0800. He looked at Tills. "The incident report goes through official channels, Senior Chief. All of it." Tills said, "Yes, sir," and meant it in the way that simple affirmations sometimes carry the weight of things that cannot be said plainly. Holt looked at Carter Webb's half-open office door, including the gym NCO who cut the lights. The door moved slightly, inward, by about an inch, then stopped. Ethan Morse stood up from the bench where he'd sat down. He was looking at Ivory with the expression of a man who has been wrong about something, and knows it, and is deciding what to do with that knowledge. "I want to make a statement," he said to Tills. Not loud, direct. "About this morning, all of it." Tills nodded. Flynn Garrett was looking at the floor. Levi Donnell, who had stepped out of Calloway's orbit sometime around the 7-minute mark of the dead hang and had not stepped back in, was standing on the wrong side of the room from his team, closer to the wall where Hazel Torres was, closer to the secondary entrance, closer to everywhere. That was not beside Brick Calloway. He said nothing. But where he was standing said something. Ivory looked at Holt. "Sir, the details. I stay classified." He met her eyes. "I know." She held his gaze. "Thank you." She picked up her gear bag from beside the bench in the back corner. The chalk block went in first, then the weight belt. She moved with the same systematic economy she'd moved with at 0527 when she'd first walked in. Before any of this, before the morning had become what it had become. Hazel Torres crossed to her, not rushing, but direct. She said very quietly, "I'm sorry for not saying something earlier." Ivory looked at her. "You stayed," she said. "That counted." Hazel pressed her lips together, nodded. Ivory zipped her bag and slung it over one shoulder, the shoulder on the side where the scar was, which might have been deliberate and might have been simply how the bag was weighted. She looked at the room once. Not a speech, just a look, the kind that records rather than addresses, the inventory of a person who has memorized rooms as habit. Then she walked out. In the silence she left behind, the fluorescent lights continued their steady hum. The squat rack at Station 4 stood empty. The pull-up bar in the back corner had her chalk marks on it, white impressions of 4 fingers and a thumb on each side, the grip of 8 minutes, the grip of a bass record, the grip of something that would not be written in the gym log, but would not be forgotten either. Caleb Marsh looked at the bar, then at the door, then at the bar again. The incident report that Floyd Kessler filed at 0647 named 3 people: Petty Officer First Class Brick Calloway, Petty Officer Second Class Flynn Garrett, and Gym NCO Petty Officer Third Class Carter Webb. It was 4 pages long and attached 2 witness statements, Amber Novak's and Elijah Pratt's, written in the compact, spare prose of a man accustomed to after-action reporting, as well as Hazel Torres's corroborating account, and Ethan Morse's voluntary statement, which he had asked to give in writing, and which ran to 6 pages, including a technical account of the Jumar specifications exchange that Ethan prefaced with the sentence, "I was wrong, and I want this on record." Carter Webb did not come out of his office for the duration. When Floyd knocked at 0710 to inform him of the report, Webb said he understood. He submitted a transfer request the same day before noon, and it was processed without ceremony. Senior Chief Tills called Commander Holt at 0725 to confirm the report was filed, and Holt said, "Good," and then, "Make sure the lights work in that corner from now on." Tills said, "Yes, sir," and that was the end of the call. At 0815, Holt met with Captain Reyes in the latter's office. The meeting lasted 31 minutes. What passed between them was not recorded anywhere, but at 0900, Reyes issued a base-wide formation notice of 14 pages. Subject: professionalism, conduct standards, and mutual respect. No names were in the notice. No specifics. It didn't need them. Brick Calloway spent the morning and the hours between the gym and the uniform formation doing the thing that typical men do, and they have been wrong in a way they cannot strategize with. Sitting with it, he sat in the break room off the team and made a cup of coffee at the dinner tray, holding it with both hands, looking at the surface of the room, and maybe look at something that is not completely clear. Levi Dunlap came in at 0930 and poured himself coffee and sat across from him. Didn't say anything. Then Levi said, "Task Force Kilo, 2009, Callaway. I had a buddy in second squad." Levi said. He came home from that rotation talking about a valley outside Canada. Said they were 20 minutes from zero when the road opened up. Said it opened up like someone had been watching the whole thing from outside the aircraft. He never moved it. Command never told him. The orders just came through, and the route was there, and they took it. Callaway put the coffee in. "You come back okay?" "Yeah." Levi looked at his cup. All of them came back. A long silence. "I was out of line," Callaway said. He said it the way he said all important things, without build-up, without qualification, as a statement of assessed fact rather than an apology, simply something of the truth. Levi nodded. They finished their coffee. At 1100, Callaway walked to the basement. He knew where it was, not because it needed medical, but because he passed it daily for 6 months and had never paid particular attention. The way you don't pay attention to something until the context changes, and you see it differently. The way a street looks different when you read something significant. The bay smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, the universal interior of military medical spaces. A young corpsman at the front desk told him HM2 was with a patient. He sat in a plastic chair by the door and waited. At 11:15, a door opened at the back, and Ivory came out, reviewing a clipboard, speaking quietly to the corpsman behind her about a medication dosage. She was in scrubs now. The teal of medical personnel, sleeves extended, hair still pulled back in the same functional band. She looked, in this context, exactly like what her file said she was. A Navy nurse, a second-class petty officer, a logistics element in the vast medical infrastructure of a working naval station. She looked up and saw Callaway. She held the look for a moment. Then she said something to the corpsman behind her, "I'll be 1 minute," and came to stand in front of the chairs. Callaway stood up. He had spent time in the break room, thinking about what he would say. and he had organized a reasonably prepared set of battles. They had not survived the sight of the place. HL2, he said. I was wrong. He stopped. Then, about all of it, this morning, he was insane. He was not looking at the box. That really crossed a small line. You see, I did look at him for a moment, not to make it right, just look. The way she looked at everything, with the same thing, with attention. No, officer, she said. She reached out and took the clip back where she'd set it against the chair, and she returned it. Calloway stood there for another 2 seconds. He looked at her, at the sleeve of the scrubs, extended and professional, giving her nothing. He thought about the pull-up bar in the 8 minutes, and the grip he'd seen in the bar's corner, and the jeweler's face in the sand, and somewhere in the valley outside Canada in 2008, 14 men walking the route that had opened for him. He walked out of the medical room. He didn't speak to anyone. But when he passed Levi Donnell on the path between buildings, he gave a short, precise nod, the kind that carries a completed sentence, and Levi returned it, and he kept moving. What Jasper Holt just revealed will stay with you long after this video ends. Stories like Ivory's Don't Get Told Them, the quiet ones, the ones who serve without asking for recognition. If this hit you somewhere deep, share it. Subscribe for more stories of forgotten heroes finally getting what they're owed. And tell me in the comments, what was the moment you knew Ivory was no longer pushing you? The 1,400 hours formation was held in the Class A course, which was itself a signal. This was not a training evolution or an administrative meeting. Class A called on people to arrive in the full dress of their service, to stand in it, to be measured by it. The sun was direct and the concrete held the morning's heat, and there were 212 personnel assembled in rows across the yard. Captain Reyes spoke for 11 minutes. He spoke about the tradition of the service, about the compression of trust that makes small units function under impossible conditions, about the particular responsibility that experienced personnel carry toward those newer than themselves, and toward those who work alongside them in capacities that might not wear combat patches, but are no less essential to the mission. He did not name anyone. He did not describe the morning's events. He did not need to. The base had the particular physics of small, isolated communities, where information travels through walls, and by 1400 most of the 212 people standing in the formation had heard some version of what had happened in the gym. At the end of the formation, Senior Chief Tills announced the disposition of the report. Written reprimand for Calloway, 30 days suspension from team training privileges. Official counseling for Flynn Garrett and Carter Webb. Permanent career notation, conduct review at 90 days. The details of the incident, beyond the conduct violations, were not discussed publicly, per Commander Holt's direction, and the name of the individual at the center of it was not spoken. The formation was dismissed. As personnel broke from their rows, a group of 8 men, E5s and E6s from the 3rd Platoon rotation, most of whom had been in the gym as peripheral witnesses or had heard from those who were, moved toward the pathway that Ivory would walk to get from the medical bay to the barracks. They did not plan this. They simply found themselves there, in the same way a group of people sometimes arrives at the same place by different routes and stands together without having agreed to. When Ivory came down the path, they stood without speaking. No salute. She was in scrubs. The context didn't call for it. They simply stood. Ivory walked through them. She met the eyes of the nearest one, a young petty officer, maybe 22, holding his cover in both hands, and nodded once. He nodded back. She continued walking. One of the older men, a first class who'd been in SWCC for 7 years, watched her go. Then he said to the man beside him quietly, "I want to know what she actually did out there." The man beside him, who had a friend in logistics who knew someone who'd been in 2nd Squadron in 2009, looked at the path where she'd gone. "No," he said, "you don't." He said it with the particular weight of someone who understands that some things are complete in themselves and don't require the details to be heavy. You just know that she did it. That's enough. The group dispersed. In the mess hall that evening, the table dynamics shifted in the specific way they shift on small bases after specific events. Not dramatically, not all at once, but perceptibly. The corner table where Ivory had been eating alone for 6 weeks was no longer a corner table. Hazel Torres brought her tray there. Amber Novak followed. Elijah Pratt, who ate with the senior NCOs, looked across the hall once and raised his coffee cup by half an inch. Not a toast, just an acknowledgement. And Ivory saw it and looked back at her food. Ethan Morse ate with his team, as he always did. But when he walked past the table where Ivory was sitting, he stopped and set down a challenge coin. A plain one, the generic base issue kind, nothing classified, next to her tray. He didn't say anything. He walked on. Ivory looked at the coin. She picked it up and turned it over once in her fingers. The specific motion of someone for whom challenge coins have been part of the language since before they became collectibles, and put it in her pocket. Flynn Garrett ate in his barracks room. At 2000, Caleb Marsh found the door to the fitness center unlocked because it was never locked. It ran 24 hours. And he went in and stood under the lights in the back corner and looked at the pull-up bar. The chalk marks were still there. He reached up and put both hands on the bar and held it, and started counting seconds under his breath. He made it to 4 minutes and 21 seconds before his grip gave out. He stood for a moment, breathing, looking at the bar. Then he made a note in his phone, 0500. He set it as an alarm. He went to his bunk and slept. Jasper Holt had a habit of finishing the day's administrative work before 2100 and then sitting for a half hour with whatever he was reading before sleep. It was a discipline, like most of his habits, installed over decades because it served a function, the transition between operational mind and something slower, something less tactical. Tonight he did the administrative work, and then he did not reach for the book. He opened the encrypted partition on his government laptop, the one that required a secondary credential. Most people in his chain of command didn't know he held, and navigated to a folder labeled PH7 after action, /Kandahar Province, /August 2009, /classified. The folder was read only. He had not been authorized to add to it in 4 years. He opened the final document, the operational summary, 12 pages, 3 of which were fully redacted and 2 of which were partially so, and he went to the last page. The last page had a list of 14 names. The 14 operators of Task Force Kilo who had returned from the Shahid Valley extraction when no extraction should have been possible. He had read this list many times. He knew all 14 names. 3 of them were people he'd had dinner with at some point in the years since. 7 of them were still in active service. 2 had gotten out and gone back to school. 1 managed a ranch in Montana. 1 was a commercial diver in the Gulf. Below the 14 names, there was a single blank line. There had always been a single blank line. The record had been closed with that blank line in it, the space where a 15th name should have appeared. The operative who had provided the route cracked the communications intercept and identified the single 40-minute window in which the extraction was possible. The name had been removed at source classification per standing protocol for a compartmented program that had been officially dissolved 3 months after the operation. It did not exist in the record. It could not exist in the record. Holt looked at the blank line for a long time. Then he opened a text editor, not the classified system, just a plain text document on the local drive. And he typed 2 words, "She stayed." He looked at it. Then he closed the document without saving it and shut the laptop. He sat in the quiet of his quarters at 2130, and he thought about a gym at 0600, and a woman who had kept moving to corners to avoid taking up space, and a tattoo on the inside of a forearm that was both a memorial and a map, and the 14 men in Montana and the Gulf and various operational billets around the world who did not know her name, but were alive to not know it, and the nature of service that asks some people to be invisible precisely because of how much they carry. He thought about this for a long time. At 2150, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. An unrecognized number, cleared format, the kind of caller ID profile associated with certain offices in certain buildings that did not appear on standard directory services. He answered it. "Holt," he said. The voice on the other end was one he recognized, a woman he'd last spoken to 8 months ago, in a context he could not describe here. She said 3 things: that she was aware of the morning's events at the facility, that certain parties had taken notice, and that the question of Ivory's availability for a specific upcoming operational requirement had been discussed at a level above his clearance. Holt said, "She said no. the voice said. She said no 2 years ago and 18 months ago. People's situations change. Holt said, her situation hasn't changed. Her answer hasn't changed. A pause. Perhaps, the voice said, someone she trusts should ask her. Holt held the phone in silence for a moment. Then, I'll think about it. He ended the call and looked at the ceiling and did not think about anything else for a long time. The following morning, Ivory was on the San Thung, the maintenance access roof of the barracks building, at 2100 hours, which was her hour. The Coronado night came in off the Pacific, salt-thick and cool, the lights of the base laid out below her and the black water beyond the perimeter fence receiving what light the sky gave it. She had a water bottle, and she was not drinking from it. She was just standing, the way she stood when she had decided to be somewhere rather than moving through it. Her phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. A number she did not recognize, cleared format, the distinctive ID profile that she had seen before, that she recognized the way you recognize the footprint of something that has been in your life before. She looked at it vibrate through 3 cycles, and then went still. She did not answer it. 20 minutes later, the door to the roof access opened and Jasper Holt came out. He was in his off-duty configuration, civilian pants, base-issue fleece, the stripped-down version of himself that he rarely showed inside working hours. He came to stand beside her at the railing. They looked at the water. "You weren't followed," she said. "No." He had not thought she thought he would be. "How did you know I was coming?" "I knew you'd think about what to say before you came up here." "You always take the longest route when the question is difficult." She glanced at him. "You came from the south stairwell." He looked at her. She was looking at the water. "You still see everything," he said. "I'm still trained to." A pause. "What do they want?" Holt exhaled. "Reactivation, something specific. I don't have the details, and they're above my clearance." He waited a beat. "They want to ask you directly." "They've asked me directly. Twice. I know. The answer was no both times." "I know that too." He turned to lean against the railing, looking at the base rather than the water. "I'm not here to argue their case. I don't know enough of it to argue it." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm here because this morning happened, and because I've been thinking about something since 0600. Ivory looked at him. "That blank line," he said. She did not say anything. "At the bottom of the list," he said. "I've looked at that document for 6 years, the blank line where your name should be, and I accepted it. The protocol, the classification requirement, the necessity of it." His voice did not waver, but something behind it did, the way a foundation shifts without the surface showing the fracture. "I accepted it because the mission was complete, and everyone came home, and those were the things that mattered." He paused. "And this morning, someone put their hands on your arm and laughed at your tattoo, and I was standing across a gym, and He stopped. "I should have walked across that floor the second I came through the door." Ivory was quiet for a moment. "You were there for less than 10 minutes before you did." "That's not Jasper." She used his first name, which she rarely did, which meant this was the version of her that existed outside of ranks and protocols, the version that had come home from a valley outside Kandahar and built a life inside an ordinary designation, because the ordinary designation was the only life available to her now. "You couldn't have known I was going to be there, neither could I. Maybe not, but I've spent 6 years knowing your name exists somewhere, and not—" He stopped, found a better way to finish. "Not making sure you knew you weren't alone in carrying it." A long silence. The water moved in the dark below the perimeter. The base lights held their positions, steady, indifferent. "Someone needed to remember," she said. It was what she had said to him in the gym, responding to his observation about the tattoo, about her keeping it visible. She said it now with the same weight, but differently inflected, the weight distributed across the whole sentence rather than concentrated in one word. "Someone needed to remember," he said back, not mocking it, confirming it, the way you confirm a coordinate. "Yes, that is the location. Yes, we are both here." "The answer is still no," she said, "to whoever called you tonight." He didn't ask how she knew about the call. "I'll tell them. Tell them whatever you need to tell them." She picked up her water bottle, drank from it this time, a deliberate gesture, a signal of returning to the ordinary world. "But tell them clearly." Holt nodded. He looked at the water for a moment longer, and then he straightened and said, "I'm putting a formal commendation in your service file. Unclassified version. What I'm authorized to say. You don't have to do that." "I know." He turned toward the door. "I'm doing it anyway." He was almost to the roof access when she said, "There's a Tan Bin, 19. He was here this morning." She paused. "He's going to be in the gym at 0500 tomorrow." Holt glanced back. "How do you know?" "Because he looked at the bar the way someone looks at a thing they've decided about." Holt held this for a moment. Then, the smallest change in his face, the thing that in a man of his compression passed for warmth. "What are you going to do about it?" "I told him to be at rack number 4, not to be late." Holt looked at her for one moment. Then he went through the door, and his footsteps went down the south stairwell, and the door clicked shut. Ivory stood at the railing. Her phone vibrated again. The same cleared format number. She looked at it. Let it run through 2 cycles. Then she looked at the screen the way you look at something you've been carrying for a long time, when you are trying to decide whether you are still the person who should carry it. She answered. She didn't speak. She listened. 30 seconds, 40, a minute. Whatever was on the other end of the call, she received it without expression, the way she had received everything this morning. Clearly, completely, without the performance of reaction. Then she said, "Send me the coordinates." She ended the call, put the phone in the pocket of her hoodie, looked out at the Pacific for a long time, the water black and indifferent and continuous, running unbroken to the horizon and past it, all the way to places she had been and places she had not yet been, and places she would not tell anyone she was going. She thought about a valley, not the way you think about something that hurt you, but the way you think about something that clarified you. The thing that showed you what you were made of by putting you inside conditions that did not forgive uncertainty. The radio in the dark. The route she'd found in 40 minutes of enemy communications traffic. The 14 voices that had gone quiet as the extraction route opened. And then the sound of movement in the dark. And then nothing. She had closed the channel and moved. She had not waited to hear their names because she had not needed to. She had known, the way you know things that your training has made structural, that they were moving. She had never spoken to any of them. She touched the inside of her forearm through the fabric of her sleeve. The coordinates she'd mapped there, encoded in the hatching under the hawk's wings, not the valley exactly, but the point of decision. The location where she'd been when the window opened. The place that was, in some sense she couldn't articulate without it sounding larger than it was. The place where she had become most completely herself. She had kept it visible, not as an advertisement, not as a claim, but because when you carry something that cannot be named publicly, sometimes the most honest thing you can do is carry it where people can see it, even if they read it wrong, even if they laugh at it, even if they think it belongs on a parlor wall, rather than on the arm of someone standing in their rack, someone needed to remember. So she remembered, and she carried it. And that was enough. Chart. At 04:58 the following morning, the fitness center lights came on in the back corner. Someone had reset the breaker panel, and the bulbs that had been deliberately cut the day before burned now with the same flat, consistent light as the rest of the gym. At 0500, Caleb Marsh walked through the main door. He was alone. He went directly to the back corner, to rack number 4, and stood in front of the pull-up bar with his hands at his sides and the chalk block he'd bought from the base supply store the previous afternoon in his bag. He waited. At 0503, the door opened again. Ivory came in. No greeting. She looked at him, looked at the bar, looked at his hands. "Chalk up," she said. He chalked up. She watched the way he did it. 3 times around the left palm, 3 times around the right, and without comment she crossed to him and adjusted the position of the chalk on his ring finger. "The pressure comes here," she said, "not the palm. The palm just supports." She stepped back. "Get on the bar." He got on the bar. "Thumbs," she said. He adjusted his grip. "Now breathe." She watched him. Not chest breathing. Down. 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out. Don't count in your head. Count against the resistance. Feel the bar. He found the rhythm. It took 40 seconds. Then it was there. Slower, lower, deliberate, the breath moving through him like something with purpose rather than something with panic. "There it is," she said, quietly. Not praise, recognition. He held the bar. 1 minute passed, 1 minute 30. The lights in the back corner held steady. The gym was otherwise empty. This was 0503, and the world that came through those doors at 5:30. The space belonged to the bar and the chalk, and the sound of someone moving on the outside. Everything in the bar was telling him to wait. 2 minutes. Why do you stay in medical? He asked. His voice was careful, not demanding or supposing. The question of someone who has nerves that doesn't fully wants to understand. Exposed. I standing a few feet back. Because it's where I need it, she said. 2 minutes 20. That's not the whole answer. She was quiet. No, she said. It's not. 2 minutes 40. The rest of it, she said, is that what I did in the field had an end. There was a mission, and it was completed, and it's over. She paused. What I do here doesn't have an end point. Every day someone needs something that I can provide. That's a different kind of thing. It doesn't make the news. Nobody pins anything on your chest for me. She paused. I think I need it to do the thing that doesn't get locked in. 3 minutes. His arms were shaking, fine high-frequency tremors, the body's honest accounting of what everything costs. Don't fight the shake, she said. That's just your body talking. Listen to it, then decide whether you're done. 3 minutes 20. He decided he wasn't done. 3 minutes 40. Will you go? He asked. And she needed more. The coordinates. The call she'd answered. She looked at him. That's not your business, Marsh. No, ma'am? 3 minutes 55. Maybe, she said. 4 minutes. He dropped from the bed and landed in the same soft, controlled balls of the feet, knees bent, weight absorbed. He straightened, extended his fingers in sequence, index, middle, ring, pinky. He didn't think about why he was doing it. His body had observed the motion and cataloged it, and it came out now because the moment called for it, because the muscles needed the release. Ivory saw it. She looked at his hands, said nothing. He bent to his bag and took out his log and wrote 4 minutes flat. He looked at the number, then he looked at the bar. Same time tomorrow? He asked. Ivory had already moved to the next station. She was chalking her hands. 3 times around the left, 3 times around the right, pressure on the ring finger, the palm just supporting. She jumped to the bar. Don't be late, she said. That evening, on the bench outside the medical bay, the one that faced west where the light went slowly out of the sky in the way it does over Pacific installations in the fall, all orange first and then a gray that was almost purple, and then the deep Pacific dark of salt air and distance, Senior Chief Raymond Tills sat with a mug of coffee and gone cold 20 minutes ago. He was looking at nothing in particular but a ledge of craft came around the corner of his ear and stumbled to himself. Mind? Pratt said. Bench is big enough, Tills said. Pratt said, and looked at the screen. The kind of silence that 2 men who have been in uniform for a combined 6 decades can sit in without requiring attention. I know, Pratt said eventually. Not proud, not confession, just factual. The way he said those things. Knew there was something. Didn't know what. Tills looked at his cold coffee. I gave her a direct order. Yeah, Pratt was quiet. She moved. She was right. The board was clear. Tills turned the mug in his hands. I gave the order because Calvary asked me to. I know. You're correcting me. Starting to. The sky went through its window. Below the bridge, 2 junior petty officers walked past in the back, talking about something unrelated. A movie, a weekend party, and their voices filled as they walked on. What unit was she? Pratt said. I don't have that clearance, Tills said. Pratt nodded. Neither do I. He stood and picked up the place as well. Doesn't need a name. He looked back at Tills. You know she carried it the whole time, right? Whatever she did. She walked into that gym with it on her arm and she didn't say anything. That's not what someone does who's trying to prove something. He paused. That's what someone does who's already passed needing to. He looked. Tills sat with the cold coffee until the smoke was pouring. Then he stood, dumped the coffee onto the grass beside the bench, and walked back to the administrator. The incident was fine. The commendation process had been initiated by the commander's office. He hadn't expected to be in contact with him. And where in the system he had administrator access to, there was a notation on the service record. He confirmed the notation. Then he closed the screen. Some corrections are large and visible. Some are 4 keystrokes at a terminal at night, when the building is quiet, and the only witness is the fluorescent light and a man's own accounting of himself. Both matter. Both are part of how things are repaired. The fitness center at 0200 was empty and still, the way buildings at that hour are still, not just quiet but fully resting, as though the space itself has exhaled and settled. The overhead lights were dimmed to their overnight setting, a low orange warmth that touched the equipment without quite illuminating it. The pull-up bar in the back corner held its chalk marks still. Ivory's from the morning, Caleb's from 500, overlapping at the center grip position in a palimpsest of white powder that recorded, for whoever was reading it, the fact that two different people had decided something at this bar on this day. In the early morning hours, before the first arrivals, before the 0500 alarm in a barracks room, 2 buildings over, before anything was required of anyone, the bar simply held its marks. Outside, the Pacific moved against the perimeter of the installation in the continuous, indifferent way it had moved for all the years before the base was built and would move for all the years after it was gone. The salt air came in through the ventilation gaps and settled on the chalk dust and the chrome and the concrete floor, claiming its gradual, patient territory. The hawk on her arm had always been a peregrine, the fastest bird on the planet, recorded at 240 miles per hour in a stoop, in a dive. Not for aggression, for precision, for the specific terminal accuracy of arriving exactly where you intend, at exactly the speed required, in exactly the window available. Someone needed to remember. She had been there in a valley that no longer existed in any official record, in the dark, with a 40-minute window and 14 voices waiting in the static. And she had found the route and opened the door and said, "Phoenix 7 is in position, get them out." She had never needed anyone to know that. She had needed for reasons that had nothing to do with recognition and everything to do with the specific gravity of things that must be carried somewhere, to carry it. She carried it on her arm, in ink, in the form of a bird that dives at 240 miles per hour and arrives exactly where it intends. There are warriors who make themselves known in the loudest rooms, and there are others who have long since stopped needing the room to hear them, who carry the weight of the things they've done in the quietest possible way, in the ink on an arm, in a grip on a bar, in the act of showing up at 0527, and simply remaining. Real service doesn't require an audience. It only requires that the work gets done. And sometimes, on an ordinary morning, in an ordinary gym, the world is asked to look more carefully at who is standing among them, at what they are carrying, and at what it means that they never once asked to put it down.